So, in fact, there are several tools that I turn to time and time again when I'm designing and creating a website for somebody. And these five that I can mention here, they're all free to use at the basic level. So, these might be nice for your community to explore and to play around with. One thing that I love to do when I'm building an author website is to take the flat image of the book and turn that into something that looks more 3D or more like a paperback. So if you head to any author website that I've built, or in fact my own author website, I've taken that plain image and made it look more like a paperback. Now, obviously, it's only worth doing that if your books are available as hard copies and not just ebooks. But this gives a really engaging look to the book on your website. So that's the first tool I mentioned. It's called DIYbookcovers.com. And Matty, if you're able to put a link in the notes for this, that would be ideal, I think.
Yep.
And then a close cousin to that, there's a nice tool called Smart Mockups. Smartmockups.com enables you to show your work in a high quality setting. So you might, for example, show somebody reading a tablet and your book can be on the screen. Or they have a range of ways where you can take some of your branding or your book cover image and insert it into a high quality photo so that it looks like it's part of a real life scene. That again is a very nice way of bringing a bit of life to your work, and that can look super impressive. They have paid options and some really nice free photos that you can use as well. One that I like to use, I think this might be a little better known, is a tool called Remove Background. I think that has gained popularity in recent times. This is ideal for taking, usually, but not always, a person in a photograph and removing whatever it is that's behind them that might be a bit ugly or inappropriate. And so this can help you create a very nice high-end look if you've got a photo of yourself that you want to use, but you're not a fan of what's behind you. You can basically cut around yourself with scissors and then either place yourself on a more pleasing background, or oftentimes a plain background does the job really well.
I ended up using a similar thing to that for the thumbnail images for the podcast because I got tired of trying to find a thumbnail image in the YouTube feed that where one of us didn't look goofy. And so I ended up taking my headshot and the headshot of the guest and removing the background and then putting them against the background that kind of looks like crinkled paper with the Indy author logo on it. And it's nice because I always tried to favor the guest. So it was usually me looking goofy, but it saved me from having to do that. But the other thing is it's this really nice effect if you're on YouTube and you're looking at the playlist. It has a nice uniform look because it's always me, the logo, and then the guest. And I think the same would be true. I can imagine that on a website, that if you wanted a uniform look, that background remover is a nice option to have.
Yeah, very much so. It gives you some really nice options for either staying consistent or for having a photograph look a bit more like your brand. One caveat with these tools, pay attention to what happens with hair. Hair is where some of the tools struggle. And any areas of the photo where there's a lot of shadow or shading going on, sometimes the tool won't quite know what's background and what's not, and you can get some quirky effects going on there. Two more tools I love very quickly. I encourage every author to know what their brand colors are and to keep track of those brand colors. I use a tool called palette.app. There are others on the market. And so my encouragement there is know your colors, know the specific color codes, the hex codes that represent those colors. And I like palette.app because it gives some really nice options for adjusting slightly some of those color qualities if you're playing around with your brand and you're exploring what's going to look harmonious.
I imagine that if people are using a template on one of those tools we talked about, some of them come with a palette. But if you don't know what your palette is now, you have a website, but you don't know what your palette is, how should people go about that?
Yeah, so that's one of my first warnings for some of the lower cost website building tools is they don't all let you specify your own individual colors. Now, if you're just getting started and you've got nothing, that might be okay. But as a designer, it fills me with horror that I wouldn't be allowed to specify my own preferred shade of blue.
Mhm.
So that for me is a real no-no if I'm examining a tool and it doesn't let me get very specific with color codes. If you don't know what your current colors are, there are some options. For example, if you use the Chrome web browser, there are some nice extensions that you can add to Chrome. The one I've got here is called Eyedropper. There are a few little tools that you can use. I think Canva, that's one of your favorites, Matty.
Mhm.
Canva also has some ability for you to examine a photograph and pick out an individual color and identify that color code. And then my final tool recommendation, we mentioned this during the main podcast. I cannot say enough good things about card.co, CARRD.co. Even on their free plan, you can actually get going with a very nice basic author website. We were talking earlier about the availability of names. If you use Card for a free website, then your website name will end in card.co. But the good thing is that not many people have registered a card name. And so there's a really good chance that you would be able to get yourauthorname.card.co, which is not a bad domain address if you're just getting going and you really do want to work on a very tight budget.
Great. Anything that's tight budget, I think, is instantly of interest to indie authors.
I think indie authors are very savvy with the pennies, and that makes good sense.